Hi, I'm Dr. Lenne Hunt with the Marriage Recovery Center, and I'm here with you in part 3 of our 4-part series on the restoration of a marriage. Just by way of reminder, in part 1, we talked about the need for repentance, which is a true and very specific acknowledgement of the wrong that's been done, and a responsibility taking for that wrong. Responsibility taking without excuse. In the taking of responsibility for the wrongdoing, a person also acknowledges the weight of what their behavior has caused the other person. Which leads to step 2. And in part 2, we looked at forgiveness as a response to repentance. Forgiveness also acknowledges the wrongdoing that was received, the debt that was created out of that, and the reality that that debt can never be truly, wholly repaid, while the party who's wounded them can make some form of restitution and can, in the future, walk differently with them as part of repairing. They can never take back the words they spoke. They can never undo the things they've done. And so the debt, to some degree, will always be outstanding until forgiveness is offered to cover it. So forgiveness is offered as a free gift in response to this moment of repentance. At the end of part 2, though, part of what we acknowledge here is that in the act of repentance and the corresponding forgiveness, there's no reparation, there's no restitution, no reconciliation that's actually occurred yet. Rather, what those two things do is pave the road for reconciliation. They're very necessary steps. Without them, no reconciliation is possible. But in and of itself, restoration hasn't happened yet. Those are just the early stages of that. Because the truth is that verbal repentance is just that, words. And until those words are married to behavior, until they are poured out in actual life, they're just words. Good words, necessary words, but they lack power. Power that can only be supplied by doing the things that we said we would do. Being different people, walking differently with the person that we've wounded. And that's where we pick up today. The third process along the path of restoration is the rebuilding of trust. And this is the longest of all of the processes. And that's going to make sense in just a moment. What this process is aimed at is answering some really key questions, primary of which is, has anything truly changed? Are the words empty, or do they reflect something real, some turning of the heart? And will they produce a different kind of dynamic in the relationship? Because the question centers around that, the heart of this really is, for the wounded party, can I trust this other person to be different with me as we walk forward? Unlike forgiveness, which is a free gift, trust is not free. Trust has to be earned. And this is that phase where you earn back some of what you've damaged. In truth, a lot of this is about the issue of consistency. And I want to explain that. There are 3 particular kinds of consistency that we're interested in here. The first is a very, very simple one, consistency over time. Will the person who has done the wounding continue in an ongoing way to walk differently now? Anybody can do better for a day, a week, maybe a month. But will they do better over time? Will they do better consistently over time? Or will they, in a cyclical way, revert back to the old behavior? Now, I want to say here that one of the complicating factors is that being human, we never get things 100% right. So there's a tension here that we walk in not expecting something unreasonable, not expecting perfection, but also holding people accountable for their progress. Both of those have to be held together. So what we're really looking for here is someone who's committed to change, who's engaged in the process of that. They're making efforts that you can see, efforts that you can hear. They may stumble at points, but if you looked at this over time, because remember that's our first area of consistency, if you look at this over time, you ought to see this upward trajectory where more and more and more of the time, their new behavior is consistent with their words of repentance. The other thing that you want to look for in this is not just the presence of good behavior, but also how they handle the setbacks. So maybe they've truly been trying. They're guarding their words better. They're making more effort to move toward your heart. And then they have one of those days, an unguarded moment, where they say something hurtful. They do something careless, and there's that wound again. What's really important is what comes just after that. Part of the progress will also be seen in their recovery from bad behavior. So they've slipped up, they've done a hurtful thing again. Do they respond to that slip up by immediately recognizing it, coming to you and saying, I'm so sorry, I see that I did that again. I hate that I did that again. I'm still committed to working on this. I'm still committed to getting it right. But I recognize I really screwed this up. Would you please forgive me? There's a huge difference between that response to bad behavior and, again, them reverting back to either I didn't do that or I did it, but, and the but could be any number of things. I did it, but I was justified in some way. Maybe something that you did. Maybe you made me do that. Or I'm justified because I was just under a lot of stress today. I'm having a bad day. Don't you understand? When there's that kind of response, that's a very different kind of data than the response that is quick to own it and take responsibility for it. So you're looking here for consistency in the good behavior, but also consistency in how they repair these occasional moments of bad behavior. And again, this issue of consistency in those sorts of ways is aimed at the question, can I trust you? Has something substantially different occurred in your heart toward me that's going to produce new behavior walking forward? I have to say that this concept is perhaps the most important one as we talk about restoration, because without the ability to trust another person, there's no safety. Without safety, there's no transparency. There's no intimacy. And marriage relationships become something else. They become partnerships, perhaps. They become business relationships. They might function around the kids. But all the things that would characterize a marriage go missing because They require safety. You have to be able to expect in your life with someone else that they're going to love you well, that they're going to honor and protect the secrets that you share, the deep things of your heart, the vulnerabilities of your heart that you share. You have to be able to trust that they, at some level, believe the best of you, that there's adoration and respect and desire and all that good stuff, all the reasons that we get married, the things that set marriage apart from other kinds of relationships, and they hinge on this. Can I trust your heart for me? Can I trust you to show up well for me, to not hurt me, to not betray me, to not abuse me? I'm going to say something a little controversial here, so hang on. There is often this view of forgiveness. I guess it's out there in the world in general, but more often, I think you sometimes hear it in church settings. A view of forgiveness that says that if you've forgiven someone, you are obligated back into relationship with them. And that's not the way it works. Forgiveness clears the air. It releases the debt. But forgiveness and trust are entirely different things. Just because I've forgiven you or you've forgiven me doesn't necessarily mean anything about whether or not you can trust me or I can trust you. That still has to be proven. That still has to be earned back. And until it is, it's unwise to waltz back into intimate relationship with someone. I think this is easier to see if we translate it into physical terms. Can you imagine saying to a woman who's been beaten, physically beaten by her partner, and who has forgiven him? Can you imagine saying to that woman, go back home to that person? If there's not good reason to believe that more physical abuse isn't just kind of lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right time to come out. That'd be crazy advice to give someone. Protecting yourself isn't evil, isn't a sin. Self-protection at another's expense, that's a different issue. But it's not a wrong thing to require safety for intimacy. Those two are intricately linked. And so I want to say this controversial thing, that forgiveness doesn't require entering into relationship again. It allows for the possibility of that. It clears the air for that to happen if trust is earned back, if the wounded party wants to do that. But it isn't a must. The other complicating thing in this has to do with those instances of relapse that I mentioned earlier. I hear this a lot in the families that I work with, that one will say to the other one, the problem here is that you haven't really forgiven me. Sometimes that's true, but more often the issue is that the wounded party has forgiven them about things they've done previously, but there continues to be in the present a good bit of re-offending, a good bit of re-damaging by still walking in bad behavior. And so it's not so much that the past offenses haven't been forgiven, but more that there continue to be new ones. And each time a new offense occurs, it lands on top of an old scar. And scars that are still in the process of healing are very tender and can easily be damaged again. So new damaging behavior has an even greater impact than it did way back when it first began. And that resets the whole clock on can I trust you? I will say that the other thing that tends to happen here that can be confusing is the reality that because forgiveness is at its base a choice, forgiveness is an act of will, it can sometimes take a while for feelings to catch up with that choice. Let me give you just a very literal example of what I mean. Let's say that that you and I have been hanging out together doing something, and I've done something careless and it's resulted in your leg being broken. And let's even give me the benefit of the doubt and say it was an accident. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I did. Your leg is broken. We're at the hospital now getting that tended to. You're going to have a cast. It's going to have to be on for several weeks. So in the midst of that, I come to you and I say, I am so sorry. That was really stupid of me. I'm so sorry that what I did injured you like that. Would you please forgive me? And you do. You forgive me. And in the next breath, I say to you, great, thanks so much. Do you want to go hiking tomorrow? That's a careless thing to say, a thoughtless request. Of course you don't want to go hiking tomorrow. Your leg is still broken. It's in a cast. It's a fresh injury. You're not going to feel up to hiking tomorrow. And for me to expect that simply because I've apologized and you've forgiven me, that there's no injury, is a really wrong expectation. The injury's still there. It will heal, but it's going to take a minute. It's going to take weeks. If that's true in the physical plane, it certainly is true in the emotional one as well. Things take a while to heal. And so part of the reality of this trust rebuilding phase is that the pain of those injuries may very well still be present for one party. They might need to talk about that pain. The pain might come up in their reactions. And so for the other person who caused the pain, they have to know that they're going to be confronted with what they've done again and again. Not by way of punishing them, but just due to the reality that the leg is still broken, so to speak. It is critically important in this that the person who caused the injury do a really good job of getting out from under shame, which means that they really live in that place of having been forgiven, because if they don't, and if their response to seeing pain is shame, then that shame is likely going to trigger more bad behavior. Shame does that. It causes us to hide or it causes us to act out. Neither one of those options is going to be healing. So the shame has to be put to death. The shame has to be taken away. And and instead the pain dealt with without carrying along a bag of guilt with you. It's a bit of a complicated thing that I'm talking about. Actually, several of the things I've talked about in this session are complicated. They require conversation, they require processing. And so that is my invitation to you. There's a lot to unpack in this. And if you'd like to do that, I would love to have conversation with you about it, about any part of that, whether you are the wounded party or whether you've done the wounding. I'd love to walk with you in this, because if you can get hold of these concepts, this phase of restoration has such power to truly transform a marriage, to transform a relationship, no matter what kind it is. Marriages can be restored. Relationships can be restored. It takes some work, some vulnerability, but that's possible. So I want to invite you to restoration and a conversation about that. You'll see information provided, ways to contact our client care team. Please do that. Please begin the conversations. That's a really good first step to making things right in your marriage. Thanks for joining me today. There will be one more installation of this series, so be on the lookout for that too. Till next time.